Construction. An industry ripe for disruption. An industry whose problems can be traced back to one thing: cash flow. This show challenges the slow payment culture in construction. We'll show you how you can get paid faster, improve your cash flow, and create more wealth through efficient management of your cash. The faster cash flows, the faster wealth grows. This is the Construction Cash Flow Show. And here is your host, Stuart Davidson.
Hello, and this is another episode of the Construction Cash Flow Show. And I'm delighted to have a really great guest today, Kevin Wright. And he's a trainer, a mentor, he runs training schemes, the Ninja Investor Property training about recycling your cash. He's got a mastermind group. He speaks a lot around property, and he's also a columnist for the Blue Bricks magazine. So welcome, Kevin. How are you?
Hi, thank you very much. Yeah. Hi, how you doing?
Yeah, really well, thanks.
Good.
So it's really great to have you on. It's a real privilege, and I know our listeners are really, this will really benefit our listeners as well.
Good.
And so, Kevin, just tell us a bit about yourself, about your background, what you're up to, and a little bit about your journey.
Sure. Okay. I've been in property. I did my first property deal back in 1983.
Wow.
And just a simple buy, refurb and sell. So bought a wreck, did it up, sold it, banked the cash. And that's still never a bad outcome today.
Yeah.
What got me started that? My mum bought me a book for a birthday present, Property Renovation Profits. And wasn't a glossy book, Amazon didn't exist, it wasn't in a bookshop. I've no idea where she got it from. In fact, neither does she now, because I've asked her and she said, "Oh, I don't know, love."
Yeah.
But yeah, read it, and it just told you how to make money from renovating property and selling it. And so I did some of those flips, as they now call them, and thought, oh, I don't know, I might actually buy a wreck, do it up and keep it and rent it out, which I did. And then a while after that, I thought, hang on a minute, I'm renting this house out to a tenant. If I rented it out to multiple tenants by the room, I'd bank a shed load more money. So I started doing that. So, of course, we now know those as HMOs, but I just called it renting by the room.
I think I had one of those. It was called a bedsit in them days, I think.
Yeah, that's another word, bedsit. Yeah, bedsit. Yeah. So literally what it is, it was a 3-bedroom house, lounge converted into front lounge converted into a 4th bedroom, communal kitchen and connected dining room. Yeah, so it's did that, took a break for a while. Then I've done a new build. Not building it myself, but being a developer type of thing. So had a little stab at that. Now a commercial landlord, and so on the investment side, that's what I've been doing. On the finance side, been in finance since 1992. The majority of that time as a mortgage broker. That's escalated to what I would call a finance broker. And what's the difference between that? A mortgage broker just does mortgages typically, or predominantly does mortgages, and a finance broker does a lot more often.
Yeah.
And originally started off as a financial advisor, and realised the time to get out of that was when I was telling people to invest their lump sum in the stock market, knowing that I wouldn't do anything like that myself. I'd stick it in property. I thought, I'm in the wrong game here. So stopped doing that, but still stayed in finance, but then got focused completely on property finance. And it's been brilliant, really, because for the last 20 odd years, I've married up the two fundamental interests in my life, and I've become part of the property investor tribe, as I like to call it. People call about tribes, don't they?
They are, yes, indeed.
Property investors, very much my tribe. And when the last credit crunch hit, I mean, blimey, it was a bit of boom time for investors, boom time for brokers before the credit crunch. I was helping people buy properties with the same day refinance, and some of them were buying 5 a week.
Wow. Wow. Yeah.
Literally 5 a week. But
Wow.
why wouldn't you if you weren't leaving any money in?
Absolutely. Do you know, it's interesting that I've been around property developments for many, many years. I became a chartered surveyor in 2002, I think it was. But I was involved in estimating around the construction side. And, you know, it never really occurred to me to be involved in property investment myself.
No.
When you're in I suppose when you're in a corporate, I was in a corporate background for a long time.
Yeah.
You get so focused in on what your job is and within that corporate environment, and you're delivering projects for investors, property investors and developers. And, you know, it wasn't even in my psyche to do it myself. It was always, you was just focused on delivering. And I suppose that's the way it was. And I think it wasn't until probably a couple of years ago that I kind of stumbled into a property meet somewhere. And it all changed. You know, I thought, crikey, I've been on the edge of this, and had a blindfold on, blinkers, and I'm thinking, wow, you know, it's amazing. One of the things that you talking about the tribe, one of the things that struck me at the first meeting was how property people share information. Yeah. And that was always something that you didn't do, you know. So
well, see, now my take on that is that if you come from the corporate world, you're brought up in a culture of scarcity. Okay, so there's not enough to go around. Jobs, promotions, you know, whatever you want to call it, there's not enough to go around. So, you know, if you're in the corporate world and your firm says, right, we've got a round of redundancies coming up, chaps and chapesses, you're all thinking, well, it's going to be you before it's me.
Yeah,
you know, that's the natural mentality to protect yourself. So it's a bit of a culture shock when you come into property, because the opposite applies. It's a culture of abundance.
Yeah.
Born out of the simple logical fact that no one person can buy all the property there is.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So there's no need to be guarded, you know, and have that scarcity mentality. You can share openly with people because, you know, no one's really a threat to you.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I suppose if you want to operate solely in a village with about 100 houses and never go outside of it, then you probably would think differently. But then that is a scarcity mentality. But you know, if you cast your net a bit wider than that, as most people do, then you know, you've got you know, the world's your lobster, as Arthur Daly once said.
Absolutely, yeah.
Memorably.
It's a great community, a great crowd, and a great sector to be involved in. You know, and even in the last couple of years, I've met some good friends and good people, and you know, you can always share your knowledge and skills, expertise, joint ventures, that sort of thing. So, what would you so for somebody starting out in property now today? Which you know, what would be your kind of initial advice to somebody that's thinking, oh, okay, you know, I have got a little bit of money to spend, or they might not have money to spend, but I'm kind of thinking that, you know, I've been to a friend took me along to a property meet, you know, this would be good, you know, I'm kind of on the first rung. What would be your advice to somebody thinking about getting involved in property?
Well, a couple of things really. I think it's deciding what your objectives and ambitions are. That's the first thing. You know, so how far do you want to go in property, and how big do you want to grow? Temper that by the fact that there's a very old saying that says you don't have to see the top of the staircase, you just have to see the next step. So you might not say, well, I see myself, you know, owning 100 properties when you haven't actually got one yet, but you should have some sort of scope of, I think, how much is too much, you know, so because that's going to feed the way that you go about manifesting that. And so I think it's almost like you have a decision tree to work through, which is, you could describe it as a number of forks in the road, and do you go left or do you go right? So, you know, one early decision to make is, do you want to buy and sell or buy and hold? because some people might have an aversion to being a landlord.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether they think it's too big a pain in the arse. I don't know if I'm allowed to say arse, but
Yeah, you are. We're disruptors on this podcast.
yeah. So yeah, I mean, some people may have an aversion to tenants, but love property.
Yeah.
So they would be, buy, refurb and sell, or buy, convert, sell, or buy land, build and sell. So they would go down that fork, and the landlord type mentality would go down a different fork. So that's a very excuse the plane flying by. So that's a very early fork, and
Yeah.
and of course you might want to do a bit of each.
Mm.
There's a strategy that says, buy 3, sell 2, keep 1.
Yeah.
I think the thing with property is that it's so varied that you can just literally almost make up what you want to do.
Yeah.
Good friend of mine, David Clouter, who's a very intelligent investor and sometime trainer, his mentor that he learned from in his youth devised as an absolute minimum 150 ways to make money out of property.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
So
that's what makes it so interesting, isn't it?
yeah. So there's layer upon layer. It's like an onion, really, isn't it? You peel, you peel off a layer, and there's an imperceptible amount of number of layers still to go. So do you want to buy and sell or buy and hold is a very early decision.
Yeah.
And if you go down, I want to buy and hold. Okay, so the next decision is, do you want to buy ready to rent, or do you want to buy doer-uppers?
Yep.
Yeah. Ready to rent is easy because you just buy it, stick a tenant in, and away you go.
Mm-hmm.
The disadvantage with that is it's a voracious cash eater. So, if you're putting 25% down, that eats up your cash like nothing else.
Yeah.
Unless you're starting from a very big cash pot as a starting point, if you're like most people that I see, you'll run out of cash way before you run out of ambition.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that can be said for any property investment, really.
Yeah, pretty
no
much.
matter how rich you are, you're going to run out of cash before you run out of ambition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, then you need to wise up and understand that buying ready to rent has a very short lifespan. So buying doer-uppers is the way to get more bang for your buck, to use another phrase. In other words, to make your cash pot stretch further. So there's a phrase that's often used called momentum investing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's taking your cash pot, whatever size it is, and making sure that you structure deals so that you can pull all or most of that cash back out in a relatively short period of time, i.e. months, not years, to go again.
Yeah.
And so if you've got a pot of cash done, executed expertly, you can buy property after property after property with the same cash, because it forms your deposit and possibly your refurb money or conversion money for project after project. Not so easy to achieve in practice, because you need some skill to be able to do that. But that really is that. So momentum investing is another way to describe it. I've built up a brand over the last decade, pretty much around that, which is called Recycle Your Cash.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. Very simply, because that's what you need to do. Another acronym has come around in latter years, which is BRR, buy, refurb, refinance. And someone's tacked a third R on there to make it buy, refurb, refinance, rent out. So, but I think the last R is probably a bit superfluous, because, the only reason you would refinance it is to rent it out. So it goes without saying, really. So BRR is another way of saying recycle your cash. Yeah. So, recycle your cash is really where most people get to if they've got any sort of ambition to grow a portfolio.
Yeah.
And it's just a case of getting conversant with the various aspects of what you need to do. And you learn very quickly that if you rely solely on mortgages, you're playing that game with one hand tied behind your back, and probably both legs tied together too.
Yeah. So what would be the alternatives that people could look at other than just a kind of standard mortgage finance?
So, this boils down into the creative finance field, and you need to look at lenders that have a different view of the world to mortgage lenders. Mortgage lenders are basically income-based lending. So they focus on people with a good credit record who never miss payments, because they're trying to secure uninterrupted stream of monthly payments years into the future. So they want properties that are pretty much ready to rent. So they would allow you, most lenders, buy-to-let lenders, allow you 28 days with which to tart up a property, but they expect it to be rented within 28 days. So, and that gives you very little opportunity to recycle your cash.
Yeah.
So in terms of what you should focus on, it's the case of the worse it is, the better it is.
Yeah.
So the more that needs doing to it, the cheaper you should be able to buy it, and the more you should be able to uplift the end value exponentially.
Yeah.
And a good rule of thumb on any doer-upper is for every pound of refurb money you spend, you should get £2 to £3 of increased value.
Yeah.
So, and that's that exponential uplift in value over spend is what gets you the ability to recycle your cash.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's where you focus on. And so the types of finance are predominantly bridging and development finance.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Now, at the mention of bridging, maybe half your readers have just fell off their chair,
Yeah.
or reach for a glass of water, or maybe a stiff brandy.
Yeah.
So because its reputation precedes it, and it's entirely unwarranted.
Yeah.
There's a school of thought that predominates in the investor community, even amongst some solicitors, amazingly among some mortgage brokers, and certainly amongst a lot of property trainers, and that is bridging finance is the last resort of the desperate investor.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah. And I'm quite comfortable with that. And the reason I'm comfortable with that is that I teach my students that it's the first choice of the intelligent investor.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So most people are not fearful about bridging because they've got an innate knowledge about it. They're fearful of its reputation. And there's a great acronym of fear, which is false expectations appearing real.
Absolutely.
People are scared of the reputation of bridging because they don't truly know it from the inside out.
Sure.
And the comparison I draw then is most of the population can drive a car, so they would have learned to drive a car at one point in their life, usually in their late teens, and there would have been a point where they would have sat behind the wheel of a car in earnest for the first time, about to take their first driving lesson, and probably crapping themselves because they suddenly realized they hadn't got a bloody clue how to drive a car. For most people, okay, for some, their dads would have taken them out on an airfield or something like that. But for the majority of people, that first realization that, I'm about to be responsible for a machine that can kill someone if I don't get my act together, and me too, possibly, it is a serious, wake up.
Yeah.
But you learn to drive, you pass your test, and over time you become such an experienced driver that you actually drive on autopilot.
Yep.
Most of the time, and I think everyone can arrive somewhere and then they get out the car and think, how the bloody hell did I get here?
Yep.
because they've been thinking about everything but driving on the way there. Because you drive on autopilot, your unconscious mind drives the car, because it's such an ingrained habit in you, and that's what happens over years. Okay, so but the parallel I draw is, okay, do you learn to drive by yourself? Of course not. You sitting to your left in the UK, possibly the right in other countries. I don't know how far your readership stretches, but
actually, they're meant to be on the same side of the road as us, but they rarely take any notice of it.
Yeah. So but who's sitting to your left? Well, a driving instructor.
Yeah.
And so a driving instructor educates you on how to become adept to drive a car safely without injuring yourself or other people. So on my training programs, you could call me, I'm your bridging instructor.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I've even found that on my own property journey, is to have mentors and coaches around you, and be somebody who's going to be your bridging instructor, someone like yourself, bridging instructor, to be there to help you learn the right way to do things, rather than pick up bad habits. If you don't have that kind of input or expertise around you, you can pick up bad habits, can't you? Which can land you in trouble.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just like a driving instructor, my primary aim is to keep my students safe.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in terms of not making mistakes in property, because I can, through my twin careers as a property investor first and a finance broker second, I can see a lot of the pitfalls that more experienced or less experienced people can't. In fact, I had a swap some messages today. Someone messaged me, said, I've got this property at auction, look to get some bridging finance on it. And I said, go give me some numbers. And so we boiled it down, what it's going to cost him. And I said, how does that sound? So he said, yeah, okay. Of course, it's remembering all the things like the stamp duty, the valuation fees, the legal fees, and all that type of thing, and the agent's fees at the back end if you're selling it, or the refinance fees if you're remortgaging it. And then we worked that out, and I said, okay, so you're going to have you're going to leave, based on your figures, you're going to leave 23 grand in that deal, and you're not going to be able to get out again. How do you feel about that? So he's going to wait to think about that, and he'll come back and say, well, that's okay, because I've worked out the cash flow, and it's going to have 5 bedrooms, and I'm going to make X amount a month profit. I can get my money out in maybe a couple of years, or and I tend to find that is the real criteria, is how much cash you're going to leave in and how long is it going to take you to get out. Ideally you'd like to get all your cash out on day one. Occasionally you do, more often you leave some in, and then it's a case of, well, how long is it going to take to get out? Usually people would accept a year or two out of the positive rental cash flow, but probably not longer than that. And some of the deals that you look at, it's going to take them 5, 7, 10 years to get their cash out. Obviously, it's a bit of a bum deal, really, and they're the ones they tend not to do. Well, they tend not to do if they talk to me. They tend to do them and realise too late that that's the one they should never have bought. Without talking to me. So it's
and it's important to be able to analyse those deals properly, isn't it? And it's horses for courses, isn't it? I mean, I'm more involved on the development construction side of things quite often. And with contractors, for example, there's horses for courses. There's certain types of contractors for certain projects. And I suppose it's like it for finance as well. It's the right finance for the right project.
I mean, I've got a YouTube channel. I think you might have watched some of that. Very easy. It's Kevin Wright Property. So it's easy to find on there.
Brilliant. Well worth a watch, by the way, listeners.
Thank you. But one of the the most simple videos on there is the 5 types of bridging. So, bridging is something that's complex. You go down a level and it actually is quite easy, but then you go down another level and it becomes complex again. And then you have to go down a further level again where it becomes easy again. So it sort of oscillates between the two. But a very simple way to understand bridging is there's probably only about 5 types of bridging loan, and every project would fit into one of those 5 types. So you've got a purchase bridge, a market value bridge, a refurb bridge, a done up value bridge, and a cross collateral bridge.
Yeah, and I bet there's a lot of listeners didn't actually realise there was 5 different types of bridging.
No.
I must admit I didn't know that. I mean, I remember I bought a property March 2019 on bridging in an auction, and I was advisor of a bridger. But it was a dilapidated property. It was uninhabitable, had problems with it, and the bridging wasn't really the right product, because I think their risk profile was, they were too nervous about it. And, you know, they were worried about things like wall ties and this and that. And then once we satisfied that, then they were worried about something else. And it clearly was a bit of a mismatch, you know. So it was, I think initially we didn't have the right product for the type of property.
It sounds like the wrong lender.
Yeah.
Really. So you just needed a bridger with a bit more of an open mind and a bit more of a venturous attitude, and most of them have.
Yeah, they have, yeah. Well, what happened there is that after I think we had 8 weeks to complete on that one, and after 7 weeks of messing about, I went to a different bridger that was used to doing these types of property.
Yeah.
Sorted out within a few days.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So, and I think that the real game changer that bridging enables is that it gets you into properties that otherwise would be the preserve of people with mountains of cash. So there are a number of properties on sale. It's a minority, clearly, small minority, but there are a number of properties on sale on any of the channels that you want, Rightmove, Zoopla, whatever, and they're not in a state right now that's mortgageable. For a variety of reasons. You know, it could be they're not habitable in terms of no kitchen, no bathroom, and a whole host of other reasons. You know, the ones that your listeners would like if they're into construction would be the ones with structural defects. Yeah. Now, even buyers with mountains of cash run away from structural defects if they haven't got construction background. Guys with a construction background would have no problems at all. I always remember I trained a builder a couple of years ago, big bulk of a man, and we talked about this. He said he said, I love them. He said the only time I get worried is if the crevice in a property that's cracking. He said, if I can get my fist in it, then I know it's serious. And I tell you, his fist was about twice the size of mine.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what he said. He said, if my fist goes in the crevice, I know it's a serious problem. Anything less than that, I'll deal with it.
Yeah.
So, you know, for your listeners, if you're thinking about doing this sort of thing, then structural defects are just an absolute winner. And I'll expand on that a bit more because I think it'd probably be useful.
Yeah, it would. Yeah.
So people, even relatively minor cracks, the general public, even those with cash, are going to run a mile. So they're clearly unmortgageable because you're not going to get that. So who's going to buy them? Cash buyers. Now, the thing about bridging is it gets you into that cash buyer market. Now, 2 things happen with that. Cash buyers, the world over, never pay top dollar for anything. Because money talks, as they say. And this is something that it transcends property, it transcends countries, and it transcends cultures. You go anywhere in the world, and if you wave a wad of cash at something, you'll get it cheaper. In almost every circumstance. Okay, so bridging because bridgers will lend on any type of property. All they're interested in is, okay, it's unmortgageable now. How are you going to put it right, and how are you going to pay us back? They're not worried about the condition of it. All they want to know is, you know, with your Bob the Builder hat on, can you fix it?
It's true. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's it. So now, so these properties with structural defects, probably more than most, are available at an advantageous price. Now, put yourself in the position of the owner of an unmortgageable property with structural defects. Yeah. You know that no one that's mortgage dependent is going to be able to come and buy it off you, either because you just understood that or because you've tried and had 3 offers accepted, all of which have dropped out as soon as the survey's done. So they will have come to the conclusion it's unmortgageable. Now, put yourself in the mindset and the shoes of that property owner with structural defects. You'll have worked out the only people that can ever buy your property are cash buyers.
Yep.
And you know from your life experience what they're going to do to you.
Yep.
They're going to hammer you on the price. So the owner of a structural defect property is attuned to accepting below asking price offers to a greater degree in most cases than any other seller. Yeah. And you know, there in this thing there are two known unknowns, if you want to call them that. So, you know, and I often say when I'm training, okay, if we went out to your local high street in normal times and we stopped 100 people, at the moment we'd have to be there a long time to stop 100 people, yep. but in normal times, and said, what do you know about bridging? The overwhelming response would be from people that actually know nothing about it, have never used it, yep. would say, "Oh, that's expensive." That's it. You know, it's a societal known unknown. And if you went out again with a different questionnaire on your clipboard and said, "What's the remedy for a property with structural defects?" People that had never been near a construction site or any type of building knowledge would say, "Ah, that needs underpinning." Okay, now, and here's the rub, because with your construction background and knowledge, you would know that a fair proportion, possibly the majority, of structural defects on a building can be rectified without going to the extent of underpinning it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So they can be solved much more cheaply than the tens of thousands of pounds that people anticipate that underpinning is going to cost.
Yep.
You just negotiate as if it does need underpinning.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. People expect structural repairs to be really expensive. And of course, as you say, there are many other remedies that you can use.
So you can negotiate on the basis that, well, if I've got to underpin this, I'm looking at 40 or 50 grand.
Yep.
And you can actually fix it for a fraction of that.
So they're good properties to look at if you've got a structural background, if you know what you're doing, and you've got a good building team that know what they're doing.
Absolutely right. So you know, anyone with any building knowledge, I'd always say to them, you know, look for the really bad stuff, because you'll pick that up. In fact, one of my modules is called 50% below market value. Yeah. And there are certain things that you can pick up, and it might not always be 50% below the asking price, but certainly in some cases it's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you can do the structural repairs, and you haven't got to do, and you're not overly ambitious regarding stripping the inside out, so that you're getting it back to within a reasonable cost, then you can get a really good return. Yeah, definitely.
So, you know, my recycle your cash philosophy, if you like, is about taking ordinary people with some money, not no money, but some money, and giving them the knowledge that they can go for unmortgageable properties, use bridging finance as their way of funding it, and therefore move into the cash buyer area of the market, which is not very heavily populated, and leave the massive properties with the small cosmetic refurbs to the hordes that come off of all the major training courses.
Yep.
And they're all falling over each other to try and get a property, and it's hard to get a bargain when 20 other people want to buy the same property that you do. So there's a couple of ways that I sort of overarchingly describe what I do, and one is to say that it's counterintuitive. Bridgers think counterintuitively to mortgage lenders in almost every respect. And I teach people to think counterintuitively to other investors. And I love to quote a phrase by James Caan, the ex-Dragon Dens guy. Observe the masses, do the opposite.
Do the opposite, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah? What a brilliant saying that is.
Yeah.
So I amend that slightly and I say, observe the masses of property investors and do the opposite.
You're absolutely right. And do you know what? I think some of the mainstream property training courses, they do focus on that particular end of the market, don't they? With the, just buying properties, maybe even the rent-to-rent market, the HMO, the just a simple redecoration.
Yeah.
That kind of buy-to-let, a single buy-to-let kind
cosmetic refurb.
Yeah. And I think that's a good thing in a way. I mean, it has its, because it gets it's that big pond which is really, really, really densely overpopulated.
Yeah.
So what we're kind of saying is, look, let come over to this other pond. Because it's really what you're talking about is probably the next step up from there. It's
it is. It is the next step up. The choice that investors have got to make is whether they want to make that journey or just go straight and step up, or just go straight to the small pond.
Yeah.
And I like to say it's a small pond with a lock on the gate.
That's it. Yeah.
That you have to know the key combination to get in.
Yeah. And you do. Absolutely. It's each little step is each step is a big step in a way, because you need to educate yourself around what the implications of that next step is, because there are different things that come into play. There are there's bigger rewards, but there's a little bit more risk. So you need to have know what you're doing. So you need to have more people around you that have got the expertise, and people like yourself that are coaching in that area. Then I think that's really important. And then I suppose where we're looking, where our clients might sit would be the next step from there, which would be, okay, I'm looking now to do a 10 flat conversion, or I'm looking at buying a plot of land and putting some houses or flats on there, so it's a kind of that next step. So again, so you can go from there, you can go from the kind of the starter buy to lets. I suppose the starter in property is the kind of the rent to rent, then the buy to let.
If you're really short of cash, if you're really short of cash, you control property before you get into buying it. There's one other point actually I want to make I think that might be relevant to your guys, because if you're doing commercial to resi conversions, okay, bigger ones, then to get a commercial mortgage, you have to have a tenanted income producing property. Okay, so if you've got, let's say, a block of offices, could be anything, but let's just pick that. It could be any number of any type of commercial, but you've got a block of offices. I don't know, maybe it's a four-story, 5-story block of offices. Okay, so no prospective buyer is going to get a mortgage on that until they tenant it.
Right.
Okay, so now you're back to the only people that can ever buy vacant commercial properties, premises, are cash buyers. So there again, unless if you haven't got hundreds of thousands of pounds in cash and you want to get into that sort of market, bridging will get into it for you. And bridging or development finance will typically lend you, let's say, 60 to 70% of the purchase price and 100% of the conversion cost. So all you need is a bit of cash on the way in, and pretty much the rest of it is funded for you.
Yeah. One of the things I find that some people fall into the trap of is underestimating the duration of the construction costs.
Yep.
And so they might be on bridging, and of course the bridging has a fixed period duration, pay back, and then they're finding if they find problems on site, it's going to take longer, you know. So it's we were looking to refinance at a certain point in time, and then the bridging runs out. Is there any advice that you could give to people that might find themselves in that situation?
Yeah, and there's a bit of comfort as well, because bridgers try and head that off at the pass. To quote an old saying.
I love all these sayings. I'm making some notes here.
Oh, yeah.
Love all the old sayings. Yeah.
Yeah. So they would ask you to, on a substantial conversion project, not a little cosmetic refurb, but on a substantial conversion project, which they're funding, they would ask you for a build cost and a build time schedule.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, they would then hand it over to their QS to validate it. And their QS would say, well, that's a load of balls. You're never going to do it in that time frame for that cost. So we suggest you go away and work it out and rework your numbers, because contrary to what you may think, bridgers don't want to snatch your house at the first, or the site at the first opportunity. What they want is for you to finish it and either sell it or refinance and give them their money back.
Of course, yeah.
You know, one of the biggest things is, are you going to build it on time, and are you going to build it on budget? Well, before they even give you any money, they want to see what your idea is, and then they'll validate it with their QS, and if necessary, they'll tell you to go away and revise it and say, you know, and revise the time frame longer and the cost structure upwards, because you're absolutely right. People tend not to overestimate; they tend to underestimate.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, there's a bit of realism injected at the very start to try and offset that problem before it occurs. But of course, you know, if you have a shutdown like we've had, you know, for the last few weeks, no one could foresee that. So, you know, there is, you know, you should always build some contingency in, but, you know, there are, you know, unforeseen contingencies that you couldn't possibly. I'm going to shut the window. Someone started drilling there. It's the gas man or someone decided it's a good idea to dig up the pavement today.
Yeah, do you know what they do? They always know when I'm doing a podcast, and then they start drilling.
Yeah, so I like the fresh air, but I have to put up without.
I normally get the guy coming around trimming the hedges when I'm doing my podcast every time. Normally, he's not actually. I closed the window today because normally he comes around and starts doing his hedge trimming, you know, or one of those blowers that blows the leaves everywhere, you know. Yeah.
So you know, those type of deals, and of course there's layers within that. So often you buy something maybe with planning permission, but not the planning permission you actually want to build out. So you would buy it with bridging finance. You would then apply for your planning permission, and when you grant that, you would generally get an uplift in value. Which means you could, and that uplift in value, there's equity in the deal there, which counts to a development finance lender as your skin in the game. Yeah,
absolutely.
So you would then refinance the build according to the plans that you got past that you actually want to build on, and build out there. And you'd probably have not a lot of cash left in. You got a lot of equity left in, but you'd massaged your cash out at a fairly early stage by the uplift in planning.
That's interesting. So are you saying that you could initially purchase on bridging, and then refinance onto development, a development finance for the build with the once you've received planning permission for the increase in value project?
Because even though you've put no extra cash in, as far as the development lender's concerned, they just look at what you owe on the bridging and what the site's now worth with the superior planning, and conclude that you've got substantially more skin in the game.
Yep. Okay, that's interesting to know. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, interesting little hint I picked up on that, because on my mentorship programs, I have guest experts come along, and we were talking about this on when we had a tax expert, and he said, now a good little thing to do is to, if this is what you're going to do, buy it and then get planning, uplift the value, and then build out. He said, you can buy it in your personal names. I mean, this is probably not if it's a multi-million pound site, but if it's probably in the hundreds of thousands, and it could be more than one of you, if there's more than one of you in it, you buy it in your personal name or jointly in your personal names, with the bridging, you get the planning, and then you sell it to your limited company and exercise your annual capital gains tax allowance.
Ah, excellent. That's a brilliant idea. Yeah.
So
there's a nice little golden nugget there, Kevin.
There you go. You see, there you go. These are the sort of things I pick up from the guest experts I put in. So yeah, I mean, you always intended to develop it in your limited company, but you're just making a tax gain, and it's £12,300, I think, is your cap. So if you've got 3 or 4 people on the project, you can make a 50,000 uplift by selling it to your SPV or limited company, and just bank the tax-free profit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and actually tax is a really big thing with property development. I mean, going back to what you said at the beginning, where people need to decide whether they're going to look at building property to hold or to flip. Yeah. And they're completely different tax regimes, aren't they, between the two? So they're setting up a company, or they're setting up a vehicle to deliver those types of projects. They're going to be different, aren't they?
Yeah.
For tax purposes.
So and I've got to say, I find it endlessly fascinating.
Yeah, I do. It's amazing. And particularly around the tax, and it's fascinating. It's complex, and I think it can get complex, but I think that's the interesting part about it. One of the things I get interested in is where you've got properties where you've got a history around the property and around the leases and around various options that you might find that need to be untangled. They're sometimes they're properties that most people or most developers don't want to touch, and they take a little bit more work. But it's fascinating. I looked at one which was a development in airspace in London, project in London, and when I look back on the title deeds, etc., and the tenants and the people that have still kind of got some interest going back years, and the property goes back before the war, and when you start to read through that and try and start to unravel it, it's so interesting because you've got the history there. But then once you can unravel that and then make a proposal to purchase that space, if you can get development on it, it's something that is kind of specialized and that most people probably wouldn't look at.
That's right.
So there's another aspect of property
absolutely,
you can look at,
And actually, from another guest expert in one of my mentorship sessions, which was a chartered town planner, we were talking about permitted development, and he said there's a new class or a revision of a class of permitted development coming out. I think it's October, which is all around airspace.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you can do airspace on permitted development.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it is really an interesting area, particularly in around London. I mean, it's there's so much airspace. Then you've got the right of light, the right to lights, tenancy, different tenancy rights and agreements, and charge holders and that kind of thing. But if you can unravel it, there are some really good opportunities to get some really good returns on investment.
Absolutely.
One of the things we're looking at, because one of my interests is cash flow around construction, and sometimes you find developers don't know too much about the contractor, the builder, the developer side of things, and how that culture works. And many developers will and we kind of take a kind of a quasi construction management route, whereby we'll manage the trades and materials and trades directly. That's a way in which to keep the costs down, but it does need some managing, because you need to know how to package up the project, and you need to know the logistics about a project. Of course, the traditional way is just to employ a builder and allow the builder to manage all the sub trades.
Yeah.
But I find that there are times when that procurement route's appropriate. But what happens there is, if you're from a developer perspective, you'll lose control of your supply chain at that point. You know, and it depends whether you feel the projects, you're happy to do that. But I always feel that where the money is in construction is in the supply chains. And from a PQS perspective, you know, you were quite often employed right at the beginning of a project to advise on the construction costs and development costs.
Yeah, right.
And so we're responsible for the cost plans and the budgeting. Yet, if the client goes out on a traditional route to contractor, at that point in time, you suddenly lose control of the costs within the supply chain. Whereas, you know, we like to manage that. So we'll generally advise on a procurement route where the client can keep control of the cash. And many people, I think a lot of people don't realise where their cash goes when they pay the builder. And I know of somebody, well, I know of quite a few builders, developers that have lost money where they pay their builder, the builder goes bust before paying the supply chain, they've lost all that money. And someone I know lost £250,000 recently where the builder went bust. And so we're in an environment now where it's high risk of contractors and suppliers going bust because of the current situation. And there's a thing, I don't know whether they realise that sometimes when a developer pays a contractor, that money doesn't always stay in his project. So the way that contractors and suppliers work, they have several projects on the go and they're robbing people to pay Paul. So you'll pay your contractor, and that contractor's using your money to run his cash flow on another project.
Yeah.
So if anything goes wrong, your money's no longer, you're not buying an asset with that money. There's another thing called cash farming that people don't realise. And so a contractor, not all contractors, but some contractors, particularly now, I think the next 12 months, 18 months is ripe for this, is that a contractor will be looking around for cash purchases on property. So he may have several contracts on the go. As soon as he gets paid, he'll pull that money into his operational costs, buy a property cash, refinance it, bring the money back into the project. Sometimes that's one of the reasons why you get long payment terms and you find subcontractors complaining at not getting paid. And it's called cash farming. And so it happens a lot. And if there's a problem with liquidating that asset or refinancing that asset, or they've got problems on other projects, it could mean that the money's not coming back into your project if you're an investor, or the contractor will go back. Carillion's a high profile case. Now, one of the reasons Carillion went bust is cash farming that went drastically wrong. So we're using investments. So there's two levels of accounting. There's the operational accounting of a construction firm, and there's a project accounts. So what we're looking to do is we've developed a process whereby we link the lender finance up to the supply chain. And so we, as a practice, would manage the cash flow rather than the builder managing the cash flow. We'd manage the cash flow from the lender. So that goes into a project bank account, and then we manage it from there. So we make sure that what happens in our particular system is that rather than the investor and the contractor paying money down the line, they just transfer what we call a digital payment obligation or a promise down the line to pay. And then once all those funds are approved, we manage that finance and pay from the bottom up. So we'll pay from the raw materials up to the tier 4s, tier 3s, tier 2s, tier 1s. That way the money, the developer knows that the money's left in the project. It stays in the project. It can't be farmed out. The suppliers are not having to rob Peter to pay Paul to pay for materials, because we're managing the materials for the investor. And I was speaking to a group of investors a couple of months ago, and I mentioned about this and cash farming and what happens to their cash when they pay the builder, and they were flabbergasted. Most of them didn't know that was the culture and that's the structure. And so from there I thought, well, We really need to do something about that. So that's why we came up with a system where, rather than the QS just managing the building cost, a peak from my background, and I'm used to working on behalf of the investment developer side, is actually we manage the cash right the way through the supply chain, even if the contractor brings the supply chain. So we could pay him a fee for bringing the supplier, but we would manage the cost right the way through.
So all he has to pay is his labour cost, is that right? And you pay his,
yeah.
And he just pays his labour cost.
Yeah, and brings his expertise.
Yeah.
Not all contractors would agree to that.
No.
Because they'll make their money through the supply chain.
Yeah,
but I
sure.
think there will be contractors out there that breathe a sigh of relief, actually, because they may be under cash flow pressures, you know, but they have the expertise. So we're looking to agree overheads profit and a fee for their expertise, plus a fee for bringing a qualified supply chain and health and safety to the project. So they get a fee that's ring fenced. And some of the contractors I've spoken to are all on board with that, because it gives them opportunity to get more projects with clients that are running that scheme. And then there's the other camp. It's quite polarized, because you get the camp that say, no, not for us, thanks, you know. But then there are contractors that say, yeah, I think it's a great idea. You know, particularly subcontractors that usually are on you know, they face the brunt of it really when the cash isn't flowing. So it's really I suppose my ambition is to speed up cash in construction, because the faster the cash flows, and I suppose from an economic perspective, the faster cash flows, the faster wealth grows. So the quicker you get a return on your investment. And most of the delays, I would say, in a construction project, delay, disruption, disputes, if you go to the lowest common denominator, it's around cash flow. The arguments start and it's cash flow. So independent cash flow management is something that I'm looking at, and I'm actually looking to speak to more lenders and financiers around this, because it reduces their. Do you think, Kevin, something like that? Because I know quite often a financier or a lender or a bridging lender they'd employ their own monitoring surveyor, but they kind of where their level sits is kind of at high level, but they don't see into the supply chain, or they don't see how that cash is managing.
No.
Do you think some of them might be open to a processor system which gives them a dashboard and a transparency of seeing where that cash goes in a project?
I would think some would, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. You know, that may be something I can help you with.
Yeah. Oh, great. That's really good. Yeah, I'd like to talk to you a bit more about that. And it's really around an old culture, you know, because I think the culture in construction goes back about 500 years, because where that saying, we were talking about sayings earlier, weren't we? And the saying robbing Peter to pay Paul actually comes from a construction project.
Yeah.
It was where they were robbing St. Paul's to St. Peter's Cathedral to pay for the construction of St. Paul's Cathedral. So in 500 years, it hasn't changed that much, you know. No. But I'm on a mission to change that kind of slow payment culture, which I think would probably benefit a lot of people. So how do you see things going over the next, say, 12 months, considering, you know, we've had a slowdown in projects. Some developers have completely, some development projects have stopped. Some are starting up slowly. And is now the time to consider getting into property, or do you think it should be there'll be a hiatus? What's your view on the way forward?
Well, I think as we come out of lockdown in 2020, it seems clear we're going to be in a buyer's market rather than a seller's market.
Yeah.
Now, what some of my mentees are already reporting back to me is an increased number of half-completed projects being put up for sale.
Yeah.
So, you know, these might be, and you know, I mean, this wasn't at a sort of big commercial level, or in particular this particular one, but one of them said that they just found a property that, you know, was a residential property, but it had been stripped back to brick and now put on the market. Now, that doesn't make sense from a seller's point of view or an owner's point of view. That makes no sense whatsoever, because you've just ripped the value out of it.
Yeah.
And that's the worst time of all you'd sell it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, you know, it's either someone that's run out of funds or run out of nerve.
Yeah. Could be.
So, and you could find there's some bigger projects that come on the market where they've been started and then aborted. So, and I think there's potentially an opportunity to pick up some, you know, some developments that that need finishing off. You know, and there are bridges around. Not all bridges want to touch that, but because there's a bit of a reluctance to say, well, you know, we don't know what mistakes have been made already.
Yeah.
And they would certainly get a QS in there to try and fish around and get to the bottom of that. But there are certainly bridges and development lenders that would quite comfortably take on, you know, part built projects and have an appetite to fund them. And you should be able to pick them up at a really competitive price.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. What I've found over the last couple of years looking at developments, I found that the asking prices have been too high. And I've been pipped at the post on developments where, you know, the construct, you know, I think people have understood, you know, when I look at the values that we've been beaten at, you know, unbelievable, you know, I mean, some developments we've been beaten by, you know, people have gone in at offered, say, 1.5 million, where we're saying we can get to 800K, you know, for a land. You know, they've been underestimating the construction costs, but paying too much for the land, I think what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you know, and that translates from, you know, simple 2 up, 2 down terrace properties right up to multi-million-pound development. If you can't work your numbers out, and there's a lot of hope value goes on. Yeah, this is what we hope it will cost, and this is what we hope it will be worth once we finish. And you know, they you know, and I say it, you know, sometimes it smacks of resolutely hammering a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah.
You know, and I also think some of the best deals are the ones you never buy. You should on those projects where you've been outbid, you've just given another developer the opportunity to lose money on it.
Absolutely, yeah. Sometimes I say, well, good luck with that. You know.
That's right. Good luck with that. Yeah. I mean, and bridges and development lenders again are aware of that, and what they want to see as a benchmark is a net profit after everything of 20% of GDV.
Absolutely, yeah. This is one of the things I come up with when people say, oh, I'm doing a development, and because people get quite emotionally involved at the beginning, don't they?
That's right.
Oh, we found this deal, and it's going.
No, they get emotionally involved with the profit.
They do, yeah. And then you kind of say, well, look, you know, the way you need to structure this is not how you want to structure it; it's how your lender wants to structure it. What the monitoring surveyor is going to be one to look for. So when we prepare the numbers and the programs, we say, look, this is how we need to do it for the monitoring surveyor, because we know what he's going to ask you. We know what he's going to say, because he's protecting the risk exposure of the lender. And you're quite right. You have to leave that 20-25% profit margin in, not for them, because they're going, oh yeah, 8%, we're still make a profit. No, you can't go in at 8%. You have to make sure you've got the margins in that your lenders want. Yeah.
And because what lenders see is that anything less than 20, when the unexpected costs and obstacles that you didn't anticipate come in, your 20%, you know, drops down to 15%, and if you was on 15%, it drops down to 10%, and that they notice a waning of enthusiasm as your profit margin gets smaller at the back end of a build.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the best way they can do with that is to, all the ones with skinny profits, is kick them out.
Absolutely. But it's been wonderful speaking to you. Yeah. And is there any, how can people get hold of you and contact you about
a couple of ways. I mean, simple ways: go on to Facebook, look at Kevin Wright, Property Finance Expert. You can always message me on there. That's a simple way to do it. You can go on one of my websites, which is recycleyourcash.co.uk. You can contact me through there, and I'll pick up any messages that come through there. So, you know, there's sort of 2 easy ways really to get hold of me.
Fantastic. Well, thanks very much, Kevin. It's been a real pleasure. Been a great listening to you, and I'm sure the listeners will really appreciate it. There was a few golden nuggets in there, and I look forward to seeing you soon. And Thanks very much. So this was the Construction Cashflow Show. Thanks for listening.
This was the Construction Cashflow Show with Stuart Davidson. Thank you for listening. And remember, the faster cash flows, the faster wealth grows.